The brunch was at a place called the Harbor Table on Ann Street in Baltimore's Fells Point neighborhood. It is the kind of restaurant where the mimosas cost $18 and the eggs Benedict come with truffle oil and a menu description that takes up 4 lines. Carol had wanted to go somewhere simpler. I had wanted to stay home entirely. But Simone Hartwell had picked the restaurant, as Simone Hartwell always picked everything. And so we were sitting at a corner table near the front window at 11:15 on a Saturday morning in March of 2025, watching tugboats move slowly across the inner harbor, while a server, who introduced himself as Prescott, brought us a basket of warm rolls that nobody had asked for. I should describe the table. Carol was to my left in her yellow cardigan, the one with the small moth hole near the left cuff that she refuses to throw away because her mother gave it to her. Carol's sister Simone was across from us, in a white blazer that probably cost more than my first used car, with her husband Marcus Webb sitting beside her, looking at his phone. Marcus always looked at his phone. I had never seen Marcus Webb look at anything else at length. In 7 years of knowing the man, I had watched him look at his phone, at birthday parties, at funerals, at the births of his own children. I used to think Marcus was rude. I had since come to understand that Marcus was simply a man who had found a way to be present in body while being entirely absent in fact, and that this was how he had survived 15 years of marriage to Simone. Their daughter Brielle, 4 years old, was sitting in a high chair at the end of the table, methodically destroying a bread roll. I was drinking my first cup of coffee. I was tired, in the specific way that you are tired when you have been running a 16-person engineering department for 11 months, while your company is simultaneously implementing a new project management system and trying to land a federal infrastructure contract worth $43 million. I was tired in the way that meant I had been up since 5:45 reviewing load calculations for a bridge retrofit project in Prince George's County. I was tired in the way that meant I had exactly enough social patience left to get through a 2-hour brunch and get home. I was about halfway through that coffee when Simone looked up from her menu, smiled the smile she uses when she has already decided something, and said, "Oh, by the way, I hired a nanny and put it on your card. $1,600 a month. You have enough." I want you to understand the silence that followed that sentence. Carol went completely still beside me. Marcus did not look up from his phone. Brielle offered her destroyed bread roll to no one in particular. Prescott appeared at exactly that moment to ask if we were ready to order, looked at the silence sitting over the table like a weather system, said he would give us a few more minutes, and disappeared like smoke. I looked at Simone. She looked back at me with the expression of a person who has made a decision and is waiting to see if you have the nerve to challenge it. I had seen that expression before. I had seen it at Christmas dinners and at our wedding reception and at every family gathering for 7 years. It was the expression that said, "I have done what I have done, and I am daring you to make this uncomfortable for both of us." I set my coffee cup down on the saucer. "Excuse me," I said. "I need to use the restroom." I stood up and walked toward the back of the restaurant. But before I tell you what I did in those 2 minutes, I need to tell you who Simone Hartwell has always been to this family. And I need to tell you who I am and what it cost me to build the life that she decided was hers to spend without asking. My name is Kathy Page. I am 41 years old. I grew up in Dundalk, Maryland, which is a working-class neighborhood on the eastern edge of Baltimore County that most people in Baltimore's nicer zip codes pretend does not exist. My mother, Roberta Page, worked the checkout line at a giant food on Merritt Boulevard for 22 years. My father, Raymond Page, drove a truck for a concrete company until his back gave out when I was 13, after which he worked part-time at a hardware store on Eastern Avenue and spent the better part of a decade being in significant pain and not saying so to anyone who could not already see it on his face. We were not poor. I want to be specific about that. We were the particular kind of working American family that is never poor enough to qualify for help and never comfortable enough to stop counting. We had a house. It was a row house on Dunmanway Road with a small backyard where my father grew tomatoes every summer in 3 raised beds he built himself from scrap lumber he brought home in the bed of his pickup. We had a used Ford Taurus that my mother drove to work and a used Chevrolet pickup that my father drove everywhere else. We had enough food and enough heat and very little else. What we had in abundance was the habit of work. My father said one thing over and over from the time I was old enough to understand words until the last real conversation I had with him. He said it so often that I stopped hearing it as a sentence and started hearing it as something closer to the weather outside the window. He said, "The work doesn't care how you feel about it, Kathy. It just wants to get done." Raymond Page was a man of almost no formal education who understood the structure of things in a way that most people with graduate degrees do not. He could look at a foundation and tell you within 5 minutes whether it was going to hold. He could look at a load-bearing wall and know if it had been properly supported just by pressing on it with the flat of his hand. He could not have named a single engineering principle if you had asked him, but he understood load and stress and distribution in his hands and his eyes and his gut in a way that I eventually learned to understand through calculations and models and 7 years of fieldwork. He was the reason I became an engineer. I went to the University of Maryland on a combination of academic scholarships, a small federal grant, and a work-study assignment cleaning the chemical engineering building 3 mornings a week before my 7 o'clock class. I graduated in 4 years with a degree in civil engineering and a grade point average of 3.72. I started at a small firm in Towson doing stormwater management work, which is as unglamorous as it sounds. I spent 3 years learning how water moves through land and how to make it move better. Then I moved to a larger firm doing infrastructure work. Then I moved again. I have changed jobs 4 times in 17 years. Each time I moved toward something more demanding, not because I was chasing a number, though the numbers mattered enormously, but because I was looking for work that was hard enough to be worth the doing. I joined Modern Technical Projects as a senior engineer in 2019. The company operates out of an office on Redwood Street in downtown Baltimore. We do infrastructure consulting, project management for public works contracts, environmental compliance work, and structural assessments. It is not glamorous work. It is the work of keeping things from falling down, which is a job that only gets noticed when someone does it wrong. I became head of engineering in February of 2024. The title comes with a salary of $138,000 per year, which sounds like a large number until you calculate what it costs to own a house in Baltimore, carry a car payment, and live alongside a wife who teaches middle school science and brings home $61,000 a year after taxes. We are comfortable. We are not wealthy. There is a real difference between those two things, and I have always known exactly which side of that line I am standing on. I carry a corporate Visa card for work expenses, issued through Modern Technical Projects. I also carry a personal Visa card that Carol and I use for household purchases. Both cards have my name on them. They are not Simone Hartwell's cards. They have never been Simone Hartwell's cards. They will never be Simone Hartwell's cards. But I need to explain Simone before I explain what she did, because without the full picture, she sounds like a cartoon villain, and she is not. She is something more specific than that, and more ordinary. Simone Hartwell is 34 years old. She has a communications degree from Towson University that she has not used in any professional capacity since graduation. She married Marcus Webb, who is 43 years old and manages a portfolio of residential rental properties across Baltimore and Anne Arundel counties. Marcus is not rich in any way that translates directly to lifestyle. He has assets but not cash flow, and he has a wife who consistently confuses those two categories. Simone does not work outside the home. She describes herself as a stay-at-home mother, though Brielle has been enrolled in a Montessori program 4 days a week since she was 18 months old. What Simone does with her days, I have never fully mapped. It involves a significant amount of time at restaurants like the Harbor Table, regular purchases from boutiques in the Harbor East neighborhood, and phone calls to Carol that begin with the phrase, "I have been thinking about something." When Carol and I first got serious, 9 years ago now, I made a genuine effort with Simone. I cooked dinners she left largely untouched. I remembered her birthday. I showed up to events I did not want to attend. I was patient with the comments, and there were always comments, arriving wrapped in the careful packaging of humor or concern, so that if you pushed back, you looked like the problem. Kathy is so serious all the time. That's just very funny to me. I worry that Carol does the majority of the housework. That seems like a lot to carry. I honestly don't know how you two afford this neighborhood. You must make more than you let on, Kathy. That last one is the one that tells you everything about how Simone has always understood me. She believed, with genuine and unexamined conviction, that I was concealing resources, that somewhere behind my paid-off 2017 Subaru Outback and my Dundalk upbringing and my off-the-rack blazers, there was a large and accessible pool of money that I was choosing, out of some combination of privacy and selfishness, not to share with the people around me. She had decided I was holding out. And having decided that, she felt that taking was not theft. It was simply access to what was already, in her understanding, communal. Now let me tell you what I did in those 2 minutes in the restroom at the harbor table. I walked into the single-occupancy restroom at the back of the restaurant. I locked the door behind me. I took out my phone. The first thing I did was pull up my personal Visa account in the banking application. The charge was there. It had posted that morning, $1,600 to an agency called Prestige Home Staffing Solutions. The charge had been made in person at their office on York Road in Lutherville the previous Wednesday. The card had been physically swiped at a terminal. That was the first important detail. Simone had not used a card number she had memorized or a saved card from an online account. She had used my physical card, my actual card, which she had apparently obtained access to at some point without my knowledge. I considered that for approximately 4 seconds. Then I called my bank. I told the fraud department representative exactly what had happened. I said that my physical card had been used without my knowledge or authorization by a third party at a business on York Road in Lutherville, Maryland, on the previous Wednesday, and that the charge of $1,600 was not something I had approved. I said I wanted to dispute the charge as unauthorized and request an immediate card replacement. The representative asked if my card had been stolen. I said that I believed my card had been used by someone without my permission. She noted the dispute, flagged the transaction for investigation, canceled my existing card, and told me a replacement would arrive within 3 to 5 business days. That was minute 1. In minute 2, I looked up Prestige Home Staffing Solutions on my phone. They had a professional website with a contact number and a client information portal. I read quickly. I am an engineer. Reading documents quickly and finding the load-bearing language is a professional habit. I found something that Simone had apparently not read at all. In the section of the website marked Client Agreements, Prestige Home Staffing Solutions stated clearly that all placement arrangements came with a mandatory 12-month service agreement. If a client terminated the agreement before the conclusion of that 12-month period, the client owed an early termination fee equivalent to 6 months of the contracted monthly service rate. 6 months at $1,600 per month was $9,600. The agreement also stated in plain and simple language that the person who signed the contract bore full legal and financial responsibility for all associated fees, including termination fees, and that this responsibility was not transferable to any third party. What that meant was that Simone had signed her own name to a contract. She had listed my card as the payment method, but the contract was hers, her name, her signature, her legal obligation. I called Prestige Home Staffing Solutions from the bathroom. It was a Saturday, but the number connected to a professional answering service. I left a message. I said that a charge had been placed on my card without my authorization at their office on the previous Wednesday, that I had canceled the card and initiated a fraud dispute with my bank, and that I wanted it clearly documented that I was not a party to any service agreement with their agency and would not be providing alternate payment for any services associated with that agreement. I washed my hands. I walked out. I sat down at the table. I finished my coffee. I ordered the avocado toast when Prescott returned. I watched Brielle eat her bread. I watched Marcus look at his phone. I watched Carol, who had clearly spent the past 2 minutes in a state of suspended tension, search my face for any information at all. I gave her nothing. I reached over and squeezed her hand once under the table. Simone watched me from across the table the way she had always watched me, like she was waiting for a negotiation to begin, or for me to apologize preemptively for making things awkward. The negotiation was already finished. She simply did not know it yet. We got home at 1:30 in the afternoon. Carol closed the front door behind us and turned to face me in the hallway and said, "What did you do in that bathroom?" I disputed the charge and canceled my card, I said. Carol sat down on the arm of the couch. She was quiet for a long moment. She loved her sister in the complicated, ancient way that you love someone who has been treating you as a supporting character in their own story for your entire life. She had spent years apologizing to me for things Simone had said or done. She had spent years managing the space between us with extraordinary patience, trying to keep everyone functional enough to be in the same room. "She's going to be furious," Carol said. "She's going to have bigger concerns than being furious," I said. I explained the service agreement. I explained the termination clause. I explained that Simone had signed her own name to a 12-month contract, which made her the financially and legally responsible party, and that since my card was now canceled and the charge disputed, the agency would be pursuing Simone directly for any outstanding amounts. Carol was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said, "Kathy." "Yes." "Is she going to owe them money?" "If she terminates the agreement, she will owe $9,600. If she does not terminate it, she will owe $1,600 a month out of her own finances, starting immediately." Carol put both hands over her face. It was not the reaction of someone who thought her sister had done nothing wrong. It was the reaction of someone who had been managing a very difficult relationship for 34 years and could see, with total clarity, exactly how the coming weeks were going to feel for everyone in her family. "I'm not going to apologize to her," I said. "And I am not going to pay it." "I'm not asking you to," Carol said. She wasn't. That was the truth about Carol that Simone had never been able to see. Carol Page, born Carol Hartwell, was a woman of genuine and disciplined fairness. She knew what was right. She also knew what was hard. She had always held both things at the same time, with a kind of quiet steadiness that I had been in love with for 9 years. The call from Prestige Home Staffing Solutions came on Monday morning. I was at my desk in the engineering department on Redwood Street, working through revised spec sheets for the Prince George's County project, when my personal cell rang. The caller was a woman named Deborah Castillo, who identified herself as the operations manager at Prestige. She sounded to be in her early 50s and spoke with the professional calm of someone who had navigated payment disputes many times before and was not surprised by any particular version of the situation. She told me she had received my Saturday message and reviewed the account in full. She confirmed that the service agreement on file had been signed by a Simone Hartwell Webb of Lutherville, Maryland, and that Simone Hartwell Webb was listed as the primary and sole account holder. She said that the card listed as the payment method had been canceled and the associated charge flagged as disputed, and that the agency needed to establish a new payment arrangement with the account holder of record. "That would be Simone Hartwell Webb," I said. "That is correct," Deborah Castillo said. She paused. "We also received notification from your bank this morning that the original transaction has been flagged as part of a fraud investigation," she said. I did not say anything. "We have had to notify our compliance team," she said. "Standard procedure in these circumstances." I thanked Deborah Castillo. I told her I hoped everything resolved cleanly. I meant it. Simone's call to Carol came at 6:47 that evening. I know the time because Carol was standing in the kitchen chopping onions when her phone lit up on the counter, and I saw her face change the moment she saw the name on the screen. She answered it. I watched her carry the phone toward the back porch and close the sliding door behind her. I went back to the load calculations. Carol came back inside 22 minutes later. Her face was not the face of someone who had just had an easy conversation. She sat down at the kitchen table. I brought her a glass of water without being asked and set it in front of her. "She's very upset," Carol said. "I expect she is." "She's saying you went behind her back." "I canceled my own card," I said. "I reported an unauthorized charge on my own account to my own bank." "She's saying it was just money, and you're making an enormous deal out of a simple thing." "The fraud flag from the bank is not something I caused," I said. "The termination clause in the contract she signed is not something I caused. Those are consequences of decisions she made." Carol looked at her glass of water. "She told me the agency called her this afternoon," she said. "They explained the situation, the canceled card, the disputed charge, the fraud investigation flag, the termination clause." I waited. Carol looked up at me. She owes them $9,400, she said. They deducted the first month's service charge from the full termination amount, since that payment had already partially processed before your dispute cleared. $9,400. I nodded once. She's going to fight it, Carol said. She is welcome to, I said. Her name is on the contract. Her signature is on the agreement. I have never had any contact with that agency in any form until I called them from a restaurant bathroom on Saturday to document that I was not a party to their arrangement. She says she's going to tell people you did this deliberately to hurt her. I considered that for a moment. I reported an unauthorized charge on my card to my bank, I said. That is the full extent of what I did. Simone hired a nanny, signed a 12-month contract with a significant termination clause, and listed my card as the payment method without speaking to me. I am genuinely uncertain how to frame that sequence of events in a way that casts me as the person who behaved badly. Carol was quiet. Then she said, I know. That was the thing. Carol always knew. It was the weight she had been carrying for a very long time. The uncomfortable call that Simone received was not from me. It was from the bank's fraud investigation unit. I did not direct that call. I did not request it. When you report a charge as unauthorized use of a physical card by a known third party, certain things follow automatically. The bank opens an investigation. The investigator, in this case, found a purchase made in person at a staffing agency in Lutherville, using a card belonging to someone who had not authorized the purchase and who had contacted the bank the same morning to report it. The investigation flagged the event as potential identity theft and unauthorized use of a financial instrument. Simone received a certified letter approximately 2 weeks later from the bank's fraud department, explaining that the matter had been escalated for review and that if she wished to provide clarifying information regarding her role in the transaction, she should contact the unit at the number provided. I do not know everything that was said in that phone call. Carol told me, some weeks later, that it had lasted 45 minutes, that Simone had cried, that Simone had explained she was family and had believed she was accessing a shared resource, that the investigator had explained carefully and more than once that credit cards issued to an individual are legal instruments belonging to that individual alone, and that using one without the cardholder's explicit knowledge and consent constitutes unauthorized use, regardless of the familial relationship between the parties. No charges were filed. I want to be honest about the fact that this was not my goal. My goal was specific, and it was limited. I did not want to pay $1,600 a month for a nanny I had never agreed to hire. I did not want to be spoken to across a restaurant table as though my financial life were a resource that Simone could access by making an announcement between mimosas. I wanted her to understand that I was not someone who could be spent. The $9,400 was the consequence of a contract Simone had signed. I did not cause it. She caused it when she put her name on a 12-month agreement she had apparently not read, and then went to Brunch to inform me that my card would be paying for it. She paid the amount. Not all at once. She and Marcus arranged a payment plan with the agency. I know this because Carol told me, in the quiet way that Carol tells me most things, in the late evenings after Brielle has fallen asleep, during the visits that have continued, with a different quality of air in the room, in the months since that March morning. Let me tell you where we are now. It is July of 2026. The Prince George's County retrofit project was completed in May and came in $320,000 under budget, which is the kind of outcome that makes a department head look very good to a board that is simultaneously waiting on a federal bid. That bid came through in April, $41.8 million. Modern Technical Projects won it. I was in the conference room on Redwood Street when our Chief Executive Officer, Gerald Holt, 61 years old, 35 years in infrastructure consulting, stood at the head of the table and said the names of the team leads out loud. He said mine last. He said it last deliberately, the way you save the thing you most want to say. I knew it was deliberate because afterward he came to my office and sat down across from my desk and said, "Your department carried this bid, Kathy. I want you to know that I know that." I thanked him. "Your father would have been proud," he said. He had never met my father. He knew about my father because I had told him once, in my first year at the company, when he had asked me over coffee where I had gotten my instinct for structural load. Raymond Page died in September of 2023. He was 67 years old. His back had never properly recovered from the years of driving, and his heart had undergone 2 procedures in his final decade, and the combination had eventually become too much for a man who had spent his whole life not saying when things were too much. He died in the row house on Dunmanway Road, in his own bed on a Tuesday morning in the fall, with my mother Roberta holding his hand. I drove 90 miles an hour down Interstate 95 to get there. I made it, just. He was still conscious when I came into the room. He looked at me from the bed with the eyes of a man who has worked very hard for a very long time and is finally, unavoidably, done. He said, "The work doesn't care how you feel about it, Kathy." I said, "I know, Dad." He said, "Good." Those were the last real words we exchanged. I think about that most mornings now, in the dark before 6, driving down Redwood Street to the office with my coffee in the cup holder and the city still gray around me. I think about him pressing his hand flat against a wall and knowing by feeling alone whether it had been built to last. I think about the fact that he gave me that, not tuition money because there wasn't any, not connections or introductions because there were none. He gave me the instinct, the way of looking at a structure and seeing immediately where the stress is accumulating and whether the supports are where they need to be. That is not a small inheritance. That is, in fact, the whole inheritance. Carol and Simone are in a different place now. Not a broken place, a true place. Something that had always been present between them got named, and naming a thing changes how it sits in a room. Simone came to our house in May for dinner. She sat at the kitchen table while Carol made pasta, and I sat across from her, doing nothing in particular. And at some point in the evening, Simone looked at me and said, "I handled that wrong." She did not say she was sorry. I did not need her to say it. Sorry is a word that people sometimes use to mean, I wish the consequences had been different, and I could not have accepted that version. What she said was different. I handled that wrong. Was the language of someone who had, on some level, actually sat with what had happened and arrived at an honest conclusion rather than a strategic one. I said, "I know you did." Not, "It's all right." Not, "Let's put it behind us." Just, "I know." Brielle was at the table that evening, eating crackers and drawing a horse on a piece of copy paper, the way she draws horses at every table she sits down to. She looked up at the silence between us for a moment, decided it was not relevant to her, and returned to her horse. 4-year-olds do not assign weight to adult silences. They simply wait for the world to offer them something more interesting to think about. I have come to believe that is the correct approach. There is one small thing that I return to, on the evenings when the week has been long. My father's 3 raised garden beds are still on Dunmanway Road. My mother, Roberta, 63 years old, still lives in that row house. She kept the beds after he died. She planted tomatoes this past spring, the same beefsteak variety my father always ordered from a seed catalog out of Ohio. She sent me a photograph in June. 3 beds, green and heavy and full, exactly as they always were when he was the one tending them. I looked at that photograph for a long time at my kitchen table on a Wednesday evening in June, with Carol reading beside me and the house quiet around both of us. Those beds are not load-bearing in any technical sense. They are not holding anything up in a structural way, but my father built them to last, and they have lasted, and they are full of something living. I think about the way people like Simone look at a life like mine and see a resource, a balance to draw against. Something built up not through the accumulation of years and early mornings and calculations done before sunrise, but through some kind of luck or concealment that makes it reasonable to access without asking. What they cannot see is what the structure is actually made of. It is not made of luck. It is not made of concealment. It is made of a man who pressed his hand flat against walls for 30 years and knew by feeling what would hold, and a girl who watched him do it until she learned to do it differently but toward the same end. That is the thing that cannot be charged to someone else's card. The work doesn't care how you feel about it. It just wants to get done. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever been sitting in a room where someone announced out loud and without apology that your life was a resource they had already decided to spend? And have you ever had to choose in that precise moment whether to respond with your face or with something quieter and more permanent? And deeper than that, has anyone ever looked at what you built and seen only what it was worth to them without once considering what it cost you to build it? Without asking what you had to give up or go without, or how many mornings you got up in the dark to get there. And this, which is the one I really want you to sit with. What is it that someone gave you before you were old enough to understand it as a gift that you have been building on every single day since? Something passed through hands, not paperwork. Something you almost did not recognize as yours until the moment you needed it most.